This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We kick off our final week of programming for 2022 with our last cattle market update for the year, covered by Oklahoma State livestock economist Derrell Peel. He shares his expectations for global beef trade in 2023. Also ahead, we're joined by K-State Research and Extension Director Gregg Hadley for a moment of reflection on KSRE programming in 2022. We discuss some of the year's challenges and the record-breaking reach of KSRE programs in the last 12 months. We end with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts, continuing our last conversation with him on chronic wasting disease in deer. He shares how hunters in Kansas can help with limiting the spread of this detrimental disease in our state. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. This is our last cattle market update for the year. We are now joined by Derrell Peel to cover this, and he is a livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University. So, Derrell, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Happy to be here, and we're finishing up the year.
Absolutely. Let's start strong in 2023, which we'll cover that a bit later. But let's start first and foremost with what we've seen in the last week or so in the feeder cattle markets. From what I heard in our conversation earlier, they're getting stronger.
You know, feeder cattle markets are really building some momentum here at the end of the year. You know, and I think that's just a reflection of the continued progress of this industry to reflect the tighter numbers that we're seeing. And, you know, we've had a little bit of rain, so some of the wheat pasture looks a little bit better. I don't think we're going to bring in a lot of wheat pasture cattle in the southern plains like we normally would, but we are getting a little bit of grazing, so folks that have some cattle are going to be able to utilize that, and that's probably helped the market a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Brought some optimism to the market for sure. And then in terms of fed cattle, anything interesting there?
Well, you know, the fed cattle market has been sort of grinding higher all year. We've been above last year's levels all year. And here in the last month or so, we've gone even a little bit stronger than that. Now kind of holding steady the last week or two as we round out the year. And, you know, there's not a lot of demand right here at the end of the year. So we're probably kind of, in station keeping mode here for the rest of the year. But, you know, at a pretty good level. And, if you look at the futures market, just in a broad sense for live cattle, you know, we've got an $8 to $9 premium built in this fed cattle market for the coming year. On the feeder cattle side, we've got about a $22 premium built in from today's, nearby futures, looking out about a year. So, you know, the market clearly reflects that we're finishing the year strong, and we're going to carry that momentum into next year on these tighter supply fundamentals. And, obviously we have some things to watch, particularly on the demand side. But the bottom line is these markets are going to carry some good momentum into 2023.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, towards the end of the year here, we kind of enter into a lull regularly. But when does that sort of pick up normally when we think about a new year starting in 2023?
You know, I think we'll probably come out of the chute in January, really kind of looking ahead. I think at the beginning of the year, sometimes it takes a little time for the market to kind of figure out its direction. But I think this year, with the momentum we're carrying out at the end of the year, we'll probably start strong fairly early in January. Obviously, we'll be watching through January. Part of that will be the post-holiday follow-up from a beef demand standpoint. We'll watch those box beef prices. But again, in general, I expect these markets to carry momentum into the new year and start pretty strong in January.
Sure. And you mentioned the box beef markets there. Anything there in the past week or so that's caused alarm in your eyes?
Not really. Box beef markets in a broad sense have been pretty steady really all year. They've weakened just a little bit here recently, but again, that's probably just time of year. All the buying for the holiday season is in place now. So we're sort of coasting out to the end of the year. In a broader sense, if you look at the box beef prices and retail prices for that matter, and the fact that we've had a new record level of total beef production in 2022, that's starting to drop on a week-to-week basis here at the end of the year. But the bottom line is we've had lots of beef and we've had strong prices. All of that adds up to the fact that demand has been really good. And even though we're watching it closely because there are some potential concerns going forward, it still looks awfully strong at this point.
Good to know. And the last cattle market update that we did was with Caitlin McCulloch out of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. And she covered the latest trade data that we received, which was, of course, the data from October of this year. But You wanted to kind of talk about some of the major importers and exporters of beef and what we can expect from them, maybe looking into 2023.
Yeah, if you take a look at the global beef market, and these are USDA's latest kind of projections looking forward to 2023. The general pattern doesn't change a great deal. If you look at the major beef exporting countries, Brazil is expected to continue being, by a significant amount, the largest beef exporting country. Now, actually, in 2022, it looks like the U.S. was probably number 2, and that's a little unusual. We've not been that high. We're usually 3rd or 4th place. As we go forward, Australia is in recovery mode, and their exports are expected to increase next year. India is still in there, and so the U.S. will, may actually fall back in terms of ranking a little bit, and our exports could drop slightly. But the bottom line is it looks pretty good going forward. So, we're still expecting a pretty good global market from that standpoint. On the importing side, of course, China, Hong Kong has emerged in the last 6 or 7 years by far as the largest beef importing country, even though it's slowing down, and China's had lots of issues with COVID restrictions there. Their economy has struggled a little bit. So they're growing more slowly, may actually decrease slightly, but again, they're at a very high level. The U.S. is the 2nd largest beef importing country, and our imports actually might pick up a little bit next year with declining beef production and high prices in the U.S. We may see a slight increase in beef imports next year. And then, Japan, South Korea are the number 3 and 4 markets. So, in general, the global beef market still looks pretty strong. And despite the fact that there's quite a bit of concern about macroeconomic conditions in a number of countries around the world, beef markets have just remained awfully good going forward. And at this point in time, it still looks pretty promising for 2023.
When it comes to us importing our beef, you talked about us being a major importer in some ways. Where do we typically garner that stock from? And do you expect that trend to continue into 2023?
Yeah, most of what we import, of course, is processing beef that goes to our hamburger market. In the last couple of years, Canada has actually been the largest source of beef imports into the U.S. Mexico is large. Australia and New Zealand, historically, Australia was one of the largest ones. But again, they've been down in recent years, and they're in kind of rebuilding mode. We'll probably see more imports from Australia, perhaps New Zealand, although a lot of their product is going to China and likely will continue to. So, in general, I don't expect to see major changes in the flows of beef. As we get into tighter supplies and perhaps even higher prices, then that's probably going to continue to support that hamburger market. And the big thing on that processing beef market is that we expect to see a significant decrease in cull cow slaughter in the U.S. next year. So those supplies are going to get tighter. That's going to put even more demand on the imported beef to help provide that lean beef that we need to make that ground beef market work.
Huge market, obviously, here in the U.S. in terms of demand and consumption of that product. Derrell, any other trends you think of going into 2023 that you are anticipating?
Well, I think the cards are kind of set here from the supply standpoint. Again, I think 2023 is going to be a sharply different market than what we've had in 2022. We've kind of got all the pieces in place here right at the end of 2022 to see this thing really, kind of turn the corner, if you will. So we're going to see higher prices for cattle. We're going to see margin squeezes in the middle of the industry. So packer margins and feedlot margins are going to be under some pressure going forward. We're going to have higher cattle prices, but on the top end, there will be some limitations on the demand side just because we've got potential recession, we've got inflationary pressures on consumers. So there'll be some squeezing in the middle of this thing. I think cattle producers in general, cow-calf and stocker producers, have a potential for better profitability in 2023. Obviously, we've got input costs as well. So cost management is going to continue to be a priority for us to take advantage of these stronger markets, but the supply fundamentals on the cattle side is going to be very supportive to cattle markets in the coming year.
Wonderful. Well, now that we've thought ahead, I'm going to ask you to kind of reflect here for a moment, potentially, on the year that we've experienced. You've obviously been a part of the livestock marketing world for a while, and you have so much insight on how these things play out year by year. So has this been a uniquely strange year in your eyes?
Well, I'm still a student of this industry, and I learn something all the time. We've sort of seen what was going to happen for quite a few months now, and we will get there. It always seems to take longer. And so I think 2022, again, was kind of a transition year to sort of get all the pieces in place. And really, it's only been in the last couple months that we've seen feedlot inventories begin to fall and reflect those tighter cattle supplies. We expect the December report to show that as well, and that'll continue going forward. And so with that last piece in place, then I think, again, 2023 will start and continue to be significantly different. So it's certainly been a challenge the last few years with all of the black swan shocks that we've been through and all of that and lots of things. But at the end of the day, it still comes down to supply and demand fundamentals, and they're still working strong. And those supply fundamentals in particular are going to be very supportive to the markets.
Sure. Well, Derrell, like I said, this is our last update for a while here on Agriculture Today. So if listeners are tuning in and they're like, well, what am I going to do now in the meantime? Where can they find more information from you?
Well, I do put out a weekly newsletter. That's available. In fact, you can just contact me, Derrell.Peel at okstate.edu, and I'll be happy to send you our newsletter. That will continue. We send that out every Monday morning. Even if it's a holiday, it goes out. And so we'll continue that through the holiday break and be back in the saddle in January.
Wonderful. A reliable resource for sure. But Derrell, I can't thank you enough for all that you've contributed to Ag Today this year.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel joining us for our final cattle market update for the year. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now in the studio by Dr. Gregg Hadley. He is our K-State Director of Extension. So, Dr. Hadley, thanks for joining me today.
Wonderful to be here.
Absolutely. So, the end of the year is oftentimes a time of reflection, right? And that's also included in extension programming. So, I thought it'd be great for you to come into the studio and for us to talk about everything that K-State Research and Extension has experienced this year.
Yes, and it's been a big year, with everything going on in society and all. And K-State Research and Extension has been there the entire time.
Absolutely, yeah. Such a key role in the lives of many Kansans, and we love that opportunity for sure, but it's also been a tumultuous one in a lot of ways. So for Kansas specifically, I think of a few things that were kind of chaotic this year. I think about the drought, heat and water concerns, inflation, global conflicts, just a few areas, but I feel like we've been there through it all. Extension programming has.
Extension program is always there to help people with challenges they face and to make the right decisions. And you mentioned the drought and the heat, and so a lot of our animal scientists and agronomists have been there through it all, coming up with alternative feeding, proper watering and everything like that, just helping producers to make the best decisions they can given the difficult circumstances of this past year. And when you think about inflation, there's the inflation on the ag price side of things. That's where our ag economists come in to help people make good financial decisions. And on that family side of things, we have our family resource management extension professionals who help with such things as budgeting and coming up with lower cost alternatives for whatever consumer bundle they're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Some key areas that I know Kansas have benefited from as far as what they've learned from extension programming this year. And I mentioned global conflicts as well because I feel like here in the U.S. we don't think too often. I mean, obviously we play a big role in the wide scheme of things in global affairs. But this year specifically, we've been kind of hit hard at home here in Kansas because we've had Antonina Boryaka join our team again, and she's been such a great resource.
She has been a great resource, and having a monthly webinar series that's broadcast through the state and actually to international countries as well, talking about what the economic outlook as well as some of the social problems and production problems that are arising because of the conflict in the Ukraine. But they have done great work. A total of about 7,500 have either listened in or listened to the recording of the series. And these are people that are from here in Kansas, 46 other states, and 66 nations. So it's a very long reach that goes beyond the Kansas borders.
Absolutely. Talk about impact there. And
yes.
We were chatting beforehand, coincidentally, about KSRE impact, and you have some crazy numbers to share with us. You were talking with me beforehand about how you never imagined we'd ever beat 2021 in terms of outreach numbers. And this year we've blown that number out of the water.
Yeah, in 2021 we had 2.3 million total contacts. That's face-to-face contacts and online contacts. And the only rule on this is that it has to be an educational contact, some sort of educational delivery. And when we hit that last year, that was an all-time high. So immediately being a director, I thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to beat it this year? And the way we beat it is that we have great specialists, great agents, great support staff, really buying into getting the information out in the way that our constituents need it. And so this year, instead of 2.3 million, it was actually 6.1 million total contacts. And when you think, oh my gosh, we only have 2.9 million in the state, that is pretty impressive in my opinion.
We have also had good things happen this year. I don't want to be too negative in our approach that we take to this conversation. We've had some great things happen this year as well. And one of those was we've gotten a new K-State president, and he's very land-grant mission focused, which that's exciting for us.
It's very exciting, and President Linton has a land-grant background, and as a part of land-grant, he's got an extension background. He was an extension food science specialist. That is how he got his start. He is very committed to us, going out and having a new era extension or a next generation extension in land-grant university. And so he's made the commitment, and I travel with him on this as well, to go out into Kansas communities once a month to celebrate extension, but to also talk about what we can do in extension and engagement. And beyond extension, what can the rest of the university do to support the issues that communities and people are facing across Kansas?
I think those visits have been so helpful in allowing President Linton to understand what Kansans need. And then he brings that insight back to our extension programming, our research programming. I feel like it's made everybody a bit more excited about what we can do here at K-State.
I would say that excitement is the key word here. Just seeing him operate, seeing him sit down and talk with all university personnel is just wonderful, and the amount of enthusiasm is just really, really nice to see.
And with President Linton, we've also had this new infrastructure revitalization idea come about for the College of Ag specifically, but of course that impacts K-State research and extension as well. So that's exciting to look forward to as well.
It is exciting to look forward to. When we think about K-State research and extension, it's research and extension. And while we don't think necessarily extension from the facilities infrastructure perspective, every bit of research that we put into our educational programs is reliant on those resources. So when you have 1960s era facilities and trying to do research for modern agriculture, we've obviously have been doing it, but there are challenges with that. And as our agricultural problems become more and more complex, you have to do it in an interdisciplinary approach. So being able to have facilities where our researchers and extension specialists can sit down together and work on these problems is critically important. It's also critically important for our student recruitment programs and everything. So this is all really, really big, and knock on wood, hopefully we have very positive things to talk about in this regard next year.
Looking forward to seeing those areas flourish. Like you said, it'll play such a key role in all the research that goes on here at K-State. We've also just had so many great areas of programming this year. When you reflect on 2022, what programming really stands out to you in your mind?
So one thing that stands out in my mind is our Rural Grocery Initiative. We host the National Rural Grocery Summit this year and had people coming from many different states. And that Rural Grocery Initiative, the reason why it's so impactful is their main goal is to make sure that we have sustainable grocery stores wherever there is a need there. So people don't have to drive an hour or 2 hours to get to a suitable grocery store. Another thing that I'm really proud of is we had one agent in Wichita County, Amy Baker. She worked for 5 years with a coalition around child care to establish the only child care facility, a not-for-profit child care facility in Wichita County. And so that's just going to be so impactful for that county. The other thing, too, is one program that actually got started during COVID and it continues to this day is Garden Hour, where our horticulture agents and specialists work very hard at educating the public on horticulture issues. And so far this year, they have been educating approximately about 12,500 people. And once again, this isn't just Kansas, but it's the rest of the United States and other countries as well. So a lot of people doing a lot of great work out there on family and consumer science programming, our VITA program, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, where our extension trained volunteers help provide income tax preparation assistance to those that are in need, and also our SHIC program, which provides counseling to seniors in selecting out their best health care program for their individual needs. We could go on and on and on. And, of course, we have our 14,000 community club 4-H'ers out there that we can brag about and everything. But it is so much fun being the director of an extension system that delivers this amount of good to the producers and people of Kansas. It is really an honor.
Well, we're certainly lucky to have you as well. We have a lot to be thankful for this year, especially in terms of how well programming has gone and how well received it has been. So for listeners out there, we really are thankful for each and every one of you tuning in as often as you do and for taking what you can from our program. So thank you to listeners for sure. Dr. Hadley, thank you so much for your time today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State Director of Extension Gregg Hadley with the end-of-year wrap-up on K-State Research and Extension Programming. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts for our wildlife segment this week. And Drew, first and foremost, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Samantha.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is our last wildlife segment for the year, believe it or not.
Did you say fortunately or unfortunately?
Unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
No, I love our discussions always. So
I do too.
I appreciate that. But this week we wanted to continue our conversation from the last time you joined us on chronic wasting disease in deer in Kansas. So you wanted to share the ways that hunters contribute to the spread in some ways?
Yeah, there are things that hunters do both to attract deer and then after they harvest a deer when they're processing it that actually can contribute to the prevalence of this disease in wild deer populations and also how it spreads around the landscape. And I wanted to touch on that because that's something that we actually can do a lot about with some very simple steps.
So the first way is mineral licks and feeders that people think are a good idea to keep deer around, but they might have some negative consequences.
Yes, that's very true. So last time we talked a little bit about how this is transmitted, but one of the main ways that it spreads among deer at a local scale is by deer eating vegetation that's growing on places where deer saliva has been deposited. When we have feeders or mineral blocks or salt blocks out in the environment to attract deer to a spot, it's also concentrating the mouths of those deer. So if they're feeding on feed or if they're licking a mineral block, we end up with the saliva from a lot of deer deposited in one place. And if there's a deer that has chronic wasting disease, then it's depositing those infectious prions in that soil. And then we have a whole bunch more mouths that are coming back to that same spot. And those deer feeders actually can become super spreader spots, if you will, for chronic wasting disease, and we sure don't want that.
Especially when we mentioned last time that this disease can last in areas, it's recorded up to 50 years.
Yeah, we really don't know what the maximum time it can be there is, but it's a long time.
I know another way that you've mentioned before is when hunters dress down their deer or process them in other locations from where they got them.
Yeah, that's right. The main way that this disease is moved long distances is by hunters moving deer around after harvest and then depositing the leftovers from that harvested deer out in the environment. So the best way to eliminate that is to field dress a deer. Actually, if you can debone the deer in the field where you harvested it, then that's even better. And then you're not taking any bone, skin, lymph nodes, blood that you might need to get rid of later back home, and then depositing them somewhere else, let's say in a different county or even in a different part of the state.
Unintended consequence of those actions that I guess most people don't normally think about.
It is. And if you do need to bring a whole deer or big parts of a deer home for processing, the best thing to do with those parts is not to take them out and throw them in a ditch or throw them in a pasture. If you can go ahead and take those parts and pieces of the deer to a landfill, that way they're going to get buried. At least then those prions that could be in that material that you're depositing won't be in the environment where critters can get to them.
I think we touched on it a little bit last time that a good way to mitigate the spread of chronic wasting disease, first and foremost, is just to test even too.
Yeah, for sure. And the way that that's done is when we have harvested deer, the hunters can cut the retropharyngeal lymph nodes, which are kind of back about the same area that the tonsils would be behind the jaw. There's a really good video for how to extract those available on the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks website. But hunters can request a kit that has formalin in it. So then they remove those lymph nodes, put them in the formalin, and then they send those off for testing. And so really, if someone is wanting to protect themselves from the potential of getting CWD or spreading it in the environment, the best way to deal with the deer after harvest would be to go ahead and debone that deer in the field, collect the lymph nodes, keep the meat isolated, maybe in a trash bag or something like that, in a freezer until you get the results from that test back, and then decide what you're going to do with that meat after you have the deer tested.
Hopefully, Drew, this reaches some folks out there that weren't as knowledgeable about the subject, and maybe now they can make some more informed decisions going from this point forward.
Yep, and I think that's one of the best things we can do is help people have the knowledge that they need to make good decisions.
Absolutely. Well, Drew, as always, I can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Yep, thanks for having me, Samantha. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Once again, that was K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts joining us for this week's Wildlife segment. That concludes today's programming. We'll be back with more tomorrow on Agriculture Today.